Hello everyone, welcome to Yatharth IAS. So here we are with yet another lecture in the polity series. Now some of you might think that why are we reading about rural livelihood in polity? Now first thing first, rural and urban livelihood chapters are an integral part of your NCERT. And also, if you look at this aspect of livelihood, it is very well connected to Article 21. Now, please understand that Article 21, which talks about right to life and personal liberty, includes under its ambit right to livelihood. So, it's definitely the prerogative of political scenarios to understand the importance of livelihood, to think of what can be the schemes possible in the direction of livelihood in case of rural and urban areas. So this is going to be the entire discussion all about. We'll understand what is rural livelihood, which all professions are covered under rural livelihood, what all do we see under urban livelihood, and what are the government schemes in this direction. So let's get started. Okay, so this is what we are going to cover. We are going to understand what are the means of rural livelihood. We'll go on and understand which are the issues that are related to this sector and what are the government schemes that run in this direction. Okay. Right. So this particular slide tells you what are the major sources of rural livelihood. As you can see and as most of us know, farming is the primary source. Besides that, many people are engaged in poultry and dairy. So many people you will see as agricultural laborers. We'll talk a little more about agricultural laborers because this is the most vulnerable section of the Indian agricultural population, and this is the area where government seeks to protect the most. Then of course you see many people involved in fishing activities. Some of them also have these small scale cottage industries, and also you see many of them engaged in handicraft manufacturing also. But what are the areas of concerns? What are the areas that we specifically need to look at? One of the population that we need to talk about here is agricultural laborers. Now first thing first, what do you understand by agricultural laborers? कौन है agricultural laborers? पहले ये समझ लेते हैं. So basically those people who don't own their own land, जिनके पास खुद का जमीन का टुकड़ा नहीं है, and they are working for somebody else as laborers. So understand here, they are not taking any risk in this case. They don't have any land in this case. So what will they be given? They would be given fixed wages. So who are agricultural laborers? People who don't own their own set of lands. Rather they work for somebody else's land, and in return they get certain kind of wages. Now please understand that the profit goes into the hands of those who have the land, and the agricultural laborer is only getting certain meagre wages. अब इसमें भी देखिए तकलीफ क्या है. There are some agricultural laborers who are bound by a contract. Now this contract may be oral or written, whereby let's say you will be engaged for a particular time period and you will have a fixed wage. But sometimes these agricultural laborers work as casual agricultural laborer. Now please understand what do I mean by casual agricultural laborers. So they'll be paid on daily wages, right? And they'll be called on days when they would have some work. So let's say in February there are 10 days when the laborer is required. So you will be called for 10 days and you will be paid per day for these 10 days. Now understand, this makes it highly seasonal in nature. जब काम है तो आपको बुला लिया जाएगा, जब काम नहीं है तो आपको नहीं बुलाया जाएगा. तो the nature of work becomes very, very seasonal. At the same time, also understand that the wages paid are very, very less. So it also creates a problem of low salary or low wages. Can we also say this is a classic case of seasonal unemployment plus low wages, जिसकी वजह से जो agricultural laborers हैं वो एक vulnerable situation में आ जाते हैं. You can call them as the marginalized section of the society, worst affected by the problems. The problem is, if you look at the rural population in India, 2/5 of them are actually working as agricultural laborers. So there's a huge section that needs to be taken care of, and there is a huge section for which government needs to design policies. Okay. Now some of them are also engaged in non-farming activities. Now what do I mean by non-farming activities? तो आप देखते हैं villages में it's not that everybody is engaged in farming jobs. Some of them you would see also work as maybe barbers, maybe nurses. They might be teachers in the government school there, or they might be self-employed. They might have a shop, they might have a general store. The point here is you need to understand that farming though forms the major part of rural livelihood, there are so many people engaged in non-farming activities also. So while designing policies, while thinking of schemes, you also need to take care of the non-farm activities. Now let's come to this, a very, very important point, because whenever you read about your policies and schemes in current affairs, you would see so many of them will cater to these different types of farmings. तो एक बार समझ लेते हैं ये कितने तरीके की हैं और इनका क्या मतलब है. Now first thing first, primitive subsistence farming. What do you mean by primitive subsistence farming? Basically जब एक farmer अपने लिए खाना उगा पा रहा है, so whatever grains, whatever agricultural produce that comes up is utilized by his or her own household only. आप उसे market में sell नहीं कर पाते. ऐसा क्यों होगा? Perhaps the piece of land is small. Perhaps the capital that the farmer has to invest is less. The result is जो भी agricultural output आता है वो उनके घर में ही consume हो जाता है. They don't sell it outside. If you also notice, there is a word primitive used here. Why? Because the tools used for farming are very, very basic in nature. They don't have these high-tech tractors or maybe irrigation equipments. The things used or the farming tools used are very basic, very primitive in nature, and the produce that is used is for the subsistence of their own families. Therefore, this type of farming is called primitive. Why? Because the tools used are very basic. Subsistence. Why? Because the product that comes out is utilized by the family itself. Primitive subsistence farming. Now let us talk about this. Just opposite or just different from primitive subsistence farming is commercial farming. जैसा कि आपको नाम से भी समझ में आ रहा है, ये वो फार्मिंग है जो की जाती है so that the produce is ready to be sold in the market. तो यहाँ पर you will see big land areas and also high-tech type of machines used. They might be tractors, use of agriculture, use of fertilizers, use of pesticides, use of modern irrigation techniques. Why? Because here you are producing for the market. The idea is to sell it in the market. The idea is to bring about commerce from it. Therefore, it is called commercial farming. Now also look at this, mixed farming, the highly successful model of farming. So this basically means when you practice agriculture along with animal husbandry in close proximity. So let's say you have a farm whereby you are growing wheat, and at the same time attached to that farm you have a place whereby you are rearing cattle. Now look at this. The waste generated from the agricultural produce can be used as fodder for the cattle that you have nearby. First thing. Maybe the byproducts that come out of these animals that you have, the cattle that you have, can be used as fertilizers for the farm. The idea here is these two can actually complement each other and the farmer can derive maximum benefit out of this mixed farming method. So, primitive subsistence farming, commercial farming, mixed farming. Now let us talk about cooperative farming. ये भी बड़ी ज़रूरी है और कई बार इस पे डिबेट भी होती है that can this actually change the agricultural scenario in India. Now let's say there is a village and 5 people in this village have small patches of land. Possible है कि हर एक के पास एक छोटा ज़मीन का टुकड़ा है. Now you need to bring about a system whereby there is produce that can be sold in the market. But आपके पास छोटा land area है जिसमें आप large scale पर खेती नहीं कर सकते. At the same time, you can't buy a tractor for a small part of land because it won't be economically feasible. So, under cooperative farming, what can be done is a few farmers with small land holdings can come together and mutually decide to join these land holdings and go about with cooperation in joint agriculture. So then they can also pool their resources. Let's say everybody has little money. They pool in these resources, and together with the money collected, they can buy certain agricultural products that can in turn increase the agricultural output of this land area. So you understand what is happening here. People with small resources cooperate with each other so that the input resources increase and thereby the output also increases. In many parts of India, we do see cooperative farming being practiced, and in future you might see it growing at a large scale also. Let us talk about horticulture as well. Now, horticulture refers to cultivation of fruits, vegetables, flowers, ornamental plants, basically besides the food grains that we normally think of when we talk of agriculture. A very growing industry in India. You see the demand for flowers rising, you see the demand for fruits rising. A very important sector in the Indian agriculture. That is why you also see Indian government coming up with various schemes that deal with horticulture. So what was the idea of this slide? Basically, we wanted to understand what are the types of farming that you see in India. And to conclude, we started with primitive subsistence farming. Then I told you about commercial farming. How are these two different? This is for farmer to satisfy his or her own needs, whereas commercial farming is for the product to be sold in the open market. Mixed farming is when you see animal husbandry and agriculture being practiced in close vicinity, and one product being used, the product of one being used as the product for another. Cooperative farming is when small farmers come together, pool in their resources and produce at a large scale. Also horticulture, whereby we talked about the cultivation of flowers, fruits, vegetables and medicinal plants. Now the big question, what are the issues that are of prime importance to rural sector of our country? तो वो कौन से teething issues हैं, वो कौन से bothering issues हैं जो rural areas को आज की डेट में face करने पड़ रहे हैं. Now all of us know that agriculture in India is monsoon dependent. So now let us talk about what are those areas, वो कौन से issues हैं जो rural sector को bother कर रहे हैं, वो कौन सी problems हैं जो India का rural area face कर रहा है, one by one. Now let us first talk about the seasonal nature of Indian agriculture. Indian agriculture is mostly rain fed. Now obviously there has been a lot of development in irrigation facilities whereby a lot of areas in India are under irrigation facilities. But if we go by data, this is only 1/3. Rest of the area is still dependent on rains, monsoons. So in case monsoon fails, it brings with it a lot of distress. Now also please understand, agriculture is not an occupation that can keep you engaged for 12 months. So of course there are high season, for example the sowing season as well as the harvesting season. But otherwise you see there are so many people searching for jobs. So the seasonal unemployment gets very important here, and therefore we need to plan strategies as to how we can tackle the seasonal unemployment that gets created here. At the same time, rural sector or rural agriculture in this context also faces disguised unemployment. Now what do you mean by disguised unemployment? Let's say a work requires 10 people and there are 15 people doing the same work. So 5 of them are kind of extra. So although it looks that these 5 people are working, but effectively they're not adding anything to the produce. Effectively, they're not contributing anything to the output. So you will also see so many people engaged in their family land, but the productivity that comes out is same. So these 5 would be under disguised unemployment. Indian agriculture in this case also faces the problem of disguised unemployment, seasonal unemployment as well as disguised unemployment. So seasonal nature would be one thing that we need to take care of. Now let us talk about inadequate healthcare facilities. देखिए इसके बारे में हम पहले lectures में भी बात कर चुके हैं. And I told you how in India we have a system of primary health centers. But the problem is lack of infrastructure and sufficient trained staff. So sometimes it is the infrastructure that is problematic, and sometimes it is the lack of trained staff in these primary healthcare center that becomes a problem. Or sometimes it can be both. So we also need to work on healthcare facilities in India. Now some of you might think, how is this related to livelihood? Please understand that if somebody is not healthy, you can't expect them to work properly, right? So it creates a cycle, it creates a never ending poverty cycle whereby health nahi theek hai, so that will lead to unemployment because you will not be working. That will create poverty, that will further make you take debt, right? And there would be a cycle of debt and poverty. So we can't look at it from a very macro perspective whereby we think only let us fix the agriculture and the rural livelihood would be sorted. No, we also need to talk about inadequate healthcare facilities that has a direct impact on people's ability to work. So please take note of this. Another major issue that the rural sector faces is the problem of food security. Now, food security basically comprises of three things. Please understand. One, the availability of food. क्या आपके देश में enough food है? क्या rural areas में enough food है so that it suffices for the nutritional requirements of the people? So one is availability. Second is accessibility. It might happen that the food is available but it is not accessible. It is not within the reach of the people. And finally, is it affordable? Maybe the food is available, maybe it is also accessible, but it is not affordable. It is not within the purchasing power of the people to buy this food. So the point is, food security can be ensured only when all the 3 A's are fulfilled. That is, the food is available, the food is accessible, and it is also affordable. Only then we can say that we have achieved food security. Now obviously rural areas faces a lot of problem with regards to food security, and Indian government has been taking specific measures for providing food security as well. Remember, National Food Security Act has to be quoted in this context. Then of course, the big issue, the big debate right now, the climate change and its impact on agriculture. Now what is climate change? Climate change is the shift in the climatic patterns of the world. So let's say the monsoon season is about rains, but it is not raining. The seasons are shifting. The amount of rainfall is reducing or increasing in some cases. All that will come under climate change. Now, big question. Does it impact agriculture? Of course, everything about agriculture is impacted by climate change. One is the shifting in the crop season. Now, this is a big problem. Then, of course, the presence of heat waves impacts the agriculture to its detriment. Then the problem of water. Sometimes it might happen then the rainfall is less, and we know that Indian agriculture is monsoon dependent. Then the crop failure would be the obvious outcome. Sometimes more than required rainfall, heavy rainfall, which can be put under the flood category, can also be a big problem. Why? Because in this case what would happen is the topmost layer of the soil would be eroded, bringing down the fertility. Conclusion is, climate change has a huge impact on agriculture. We'll be having more of it in future. We need to be future ready for Indian agriculture to survive the burnt given by climate change. We need to take note of this. These were some of the issues that are plugging the rural livelihood in our country, specifically of course agriculture, because that is the major source of livelihood in the rural sector. We, being an agricultural dependent economy or agriculture driven economy, we need to take care of these issues that are maybe causing a lot of problem in the rural sectors of our country. So are there some government schemes, are there some government programs that aim to solve these problems? Now, of course, there are a lot of them, but here are a few that I want you to know and use in your answers, quote in your answers. First thing first, we have this National Rural Health Mission. Very important. This National Rural Health Mission aims at making healthcare affordable and providing quality healthcare, equitable healthcare to the rural sectors of our country. This National Rural Health Mission has been functioning since 2005 and more has been added to it every now and then. So more schemes, more programs are clubbed under National Rural Health Mission. The idea is simple: to provide health facilities to the rural sector of the country in terms of they should be equitable and they should be affordable and they should be of quality. This comes under National Rural Health Mission. Now, we also have Animal Husbandry Infrastructure Development Fund. Now, when we think of rural livelihood, we often presume it to be only about agriculture, but that's not the correct way of looking at it. Why? Because when you talk about rural livelihood, animal husbandry is a very crucial part of it. So, the Animal Husbandry Infrastructure Development Fund, the idea is to develop the infrastructure that helps in the promotion of animal husbandry. A lot of loan schemes, programs, training programs are conducted under this so that animal husbandry can emerge as a major source of livelihood for the rural population of our country, which would also be a part of mixed farming. If you remember, we had discussed the types of farming, and one good way to make Indian agriculture sustainable, profitable can be to include animal husbandry under its domain. Then, of course, National Agriculture Market, NAM, also called as NAM. A lot has been talked about NAM. Next, of course, is ENAM, right? So, the idea is to create a portal whereby, if you've heard of this term, AMCs, which are the mandis. So, a few mandis from the entire country have been identified and they would be grouped under an online portal created under ENAM. The idea is simple: to make things transparent so that everybody knows the cost, everybody knows the demand and the supply. There is fair auctioning because all this is going to be online under ENAM. ENAM, that is electronic portal created for accumulating or putting all these mandis into one domain, right? And on this domain there would be transparency, fair prices, you can see the demand, the supply, and also the auctioning would be in public scrutiny. So take note of it, ENAM. And then, of course, National Horticulture Mission. Now, I told you horticulture basically means whereby you are cultivating fruits, vegetables, flowers, ornamental plants. All this is in huge demand, right? And with this National Horticulture Mission, we aim to enhance horticulture production in India so that there's also an alternate source of livelihood to the farmers of the country. Those who are dependent on the basic or the conventional type of agriculture can also come up with horticulture practices. Reason being, the demand for horticulture would be year round. Times when you're not able to engage in conventional agriculture, the farmers can utilize that time to take, to work on horticultural practices, and therefore this can be a major source of solving some of the problems that grip Indian agriculture. So this part of the lecture was about rural livelihood. Now let us move over and talk about urban livelihood. Moving over to the next part of the lecture, whereby we will be talking about urban livelihood. So first thing first, what do we mean when we talk about urban livelihood? People in urban areas also recourse to various employment opportunities so that they can sustain their lives, and that is what we call as urban livelihood. Now, of course, there are a lot of reasons why you see migration in urban areas or the phenomena of urbanization, whereby you see people moving from rural areas to urban areas. To understand it better, let us talk about the push and pull factors of migration. Now see, somebody in a rural area and there is famine, there is drought, there is lack of employment opportunities, lack of educational opportunities. Then people from the rural areas tend to move to urban areas because these factors actually pushed them. And these would be called the push factors of migration, whereby there would also be some pull factors. Now what do I mean by pull factors? There would be something that would be pulling these people from the rural areas to the urban areas. For example, better employment opportunities, better standard of living, more resources. So that would be known as the pull factors. Together with push and pull factors, you see so many people moving from rural areas of our country to urban areas in search of job opportunities, and they become a part of the urban workforce. Now, the problem is, as long as people are employed in the organized sector, there are a lot of securities available. But people who often move to urban areas, specifically from rural areas, tend to be a part of unorganized sector more. So let us understand what is the difference between this organized sector and non-organized sector or unorganized sector, and let us also talk about what are the government schemes. But before that, let us look at some of the means of livelihood that you often see in urban areas. You see people working as street vendors. Now you would understand that a street vendor would not be employed under a formal contract. The person might be a self-employed person or maybe working for a boss, but this would not be bound by any contract. There would be no gratuity, there would be no paid leaves, there would be no fixed hours of work. If you tend to look at these characteristics, these point to the street vendor being a part of an unorganized sector, and that is what I want to highlight here. Then there would be some people who would be self-employed. Now under this also, there might be some doing it on a larger scale, whereas some might be doing it at a smaller scale. Then you see, of course, professionals like doctors, you see factory workers, then you see people working in the BPO sector, business process outsourcing, and of course you have people working as managers in different organizations. Now, here comes the difference between organized and unorganized sector that we need to understand very carefully, because in urban areas the problem is most people end up being a part of unorganized sector, and this is where the problem of urban livelihoods emerge. Of course, there is a problem of lack of employment, and therefore you see people being ready to work under the unorganized sector also. So let us look at what is the difference between organized and unorganized sector. So when I talk about organized sector, you are promised, the employees are promised works, and these workers are subject to government regulations. So for example, there is a government regulation that says there should be maternity relief given to the women employees of your office. This won't be applicable in an unorganized sector. Why? Because they don't follow the government standards in this case, and they are not obliged under any contract or any formal agreement with the employee in this case. Then of course, the employment is routine in case of organized sector. So it's not like you would be given work 6 months in a year or 4 months in a year or 7 months in a year. You work at a regular routine operation, right? And people are paid if you are made to work more. So let's say your working hours is 10 hours, but you're asked to stay back for 3 more hours, you would be paid for it. Whereas in the unorganized sector, it is often noted that the person is underpaid and more often than not also overworked. So you might be asked to, work for 10 hours, 12 hours, 13 hours and not paid for it. Then employees receive medical benefit as in context of organized sector. So there is a regular medical benefit that is given here. Not available under the unorganized sector, no fair compensation. Then also in the organized sector, you would see that government keeps a track and the employer is bound by government rules and regulations. Whereas under the unorganized sector, you don't see the organization having any such control. No government body would be able to impose strict regulations in this case, and therefore it becomes highly problematic for the people working in the unorganized sector. Salaries, promotions, increments, there is a procedure for it, there is a format for it, there is regular appraisals in the organized sector, whereas in the unorganized sector, nothing of this sort is followed. So there is no idea of promotions, nothing in terms of increment, and finally, working in an organized sector is a stable position. Obviously, you can be asked to leave if you are not performing well, but otherwise there is a stability that you would be getting your salaries at the end of the month or the beginning of the next month. But here, it is highly unstable. You might be asked to leave Tomorrow, you might not get your salaries on time. Therefore, we understand that in urban areas, the problem majorly lies with the unorganized sector and the idea that more and more people are actually engaged in the unorganized sector as compared to the organized sector. तो हमें ये तो समझ में आ गया कि अनऑर्गेनाइज्ड सेक्टर की कई सारी समस्याएं हैं अर्बन एरियाज में. बट व्हाट इज द गवर्नमेंट डूइंग फॉर इट? एंड हियर आई वुड हाईलाइट 3 वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट schemes that I want you to know about and that you can very easily quote in your answers as an example, right? And to establish whatever point you are trying to make. One of this is e-Shram portal. So see, the idea is, हमें पता है कि जो भी लोग unorganized sector में काम कर रहे हैं उनका registration नहीं है. We don't know who are these people, right? And so it gets very difficult to frame policies also. तो e-Shram portal में देखिए क्या किया गया है. People are registered, people who are working in the unorganized sector would be registered and they would be issued a e-Shram card. The idea is all these people would be a part of the e-Shram portal, all the unorganized sector workers, and they'll also be issued an e-Shram card. So this e-Shram card would be like the Aadhaar card, whereby there would be 12-digit numbers. Now what is the benefit, you might ask me? Let's say somebody dies while being a part of the job or the unorganized work that the person was doing. Obviously, the employer will not, claim any or would not provide any benefit in that case. But if you are registered under the e-Shram portal, you would be given a compensation of 2 lakhs, right? In case of major disability, in case of death. In case there is a partial disability, the beneficiary will be provided 1 lakh rupees. So the idea here is at least there would be some kind of registration, there would be some kind of organized notification with the coming of the e-Shram portal. Remember, there would be e-Shram cards that would be issued to the people working in the unorganized sector. Then of course we have PM Street Vendors Atmanirbhar Nidhi. Now this was also in news because due to the COVID-19 pandemic, so many people who were working as street vendors were impacted. So this scheme says that these people who are working as street vendors would be provided some kind of loan facilities at a subsidized interest rate. These people would also be provided some working capital so that they can function better. That would be part of Prime Minister Street Vendors Atmanirbhar Nidhi. Also, as a part of that, government will be incentivizing digital payments. So those street vendors who are practicing more and more of digital transactions, digital payments would be incentivized. Take note of it. PM Street Vendors Atmanirbhar Nidhi. Then we also have this Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Man Dhan Yojana. Now this is also very important because understand that one of the major problems with the unorganized sector is there is no sense of security involved. Specifically in terms of the person knows कि अभी we are having hand to mouth, but once we will be unable to work, we'll have nothing to survive on. So this is kind of a pension scheme that is started by the government in collaboration with LIC. The idea is there would be a premium that would be decided and it would be a 50-50 contribution. So 50% contribution will come from the beneficiary and similarly 50% contribution will come from the government. And after the person attains the age of 60 years, there would be a pension of 3,000 rupees that would be provided. So I hope you get my point here. इससे इन तीनों मेथड से बेसिकली आपने करने की क्या कोशिश की है कि जो अनऑर्गेनाइज्ड सेक्टर है उसको एटलीस्ट कुछ ऐसी सुविधाएं मिले, एटलीस्ट देयर आर सम बेनिफिट्स दैट कम्स अंडर टू द पीपल हु आर वर्किंग under the unorganized sector, so that there is some kind of organization that goes into the unorganized sector of our country. The fact of the matter is, livelihood is very important, whether it be rural livelihood or urban livelihood. We know what is the importance of livelihood. That is why Supreme Court has time and again said that right to livelihood is an integral part of Article 21, that is right to life and personal liberty. Very recently, there was a petition about the ban on firecrackers. Even in that case, Supreme Court said that yes, we will go about banning firecrackers, but we can't ban it completely. And therefore, they said, that we'll continue the use of green firecrackers. The idea quoted there was, we need to strike a balance between the right to health of the people and the right to livelihood of these people producing firecrackers. What I want to establish here is Supreme Court has reiterated time and again that right to livelihood is very important part of Article 21, and therefore everything that you read, write, or maybe understand, look at it from this perspective. So this was about rural and urban livelihoods. Thank you.